Signs of the Southland, Monday, August 29th, 2022. Football season is here. Gentlemen, it kicked off I think it actually technically kicked off at Western Kentucky, but for our intents and purposes, it kicked off in Ireland, just like it did in 2016 with Nebraska at Northwestern in an epic Scott Frost day. Mr. Purdy, did you watch this game and enjoy what was just the most bizarre edition of Schadenfreude internationally I think I've ever seen in college football?
I did watch some of this game. I missed the onside kick, which I'm really upset about because I just would have laughed so hard when that happened. I am displeased that I wasn't there for the free beer that happened in the second half when the internet.
It wasn't just free beer. They were giving away
everything?
pints of gin and tonics.
Oh my God.
They ran out of beer because they gave away free beer because all the internet was down. And so all of their point of sale systems were down. They started giving out free pints of gin and tonics. Sorry, please continue.
Only in Ireland. No, hey, at least football is back. I was glad to see something to fill in before I turned on the StatCast of Tech Volleyball that day.
I was going to say, it's been a great onside kick when a history football YouTuber I follow has already made a video about it. So I'm thinking that it might be a historic turning point for one
very
Nebraska
well could be
team.
The reason Scott Frost does not last this year at Nebraska and then takes, I don't know, Texas Tech or Texas State or someone to an unreasonable record.
Am I like in position here to now make my annual, I guess weekly, not annual, I don't know where I got annual from there, my Chicago reference that I am obliged to make being a member of this podcast and say Chicago's Big Ten team really exceeding expectations. Also, for those who are extremely sicko, the Illinois beatdown of Wyoming, a phrase that I don't think anyone's said about Illinois football in quite some time. So, really, really great day for the state of Illinois, which is, the last however many years, maybe ever not been a traditional hub of college football. So that's been fun. At least I got some at least hearty cackles in this Saturday, if not true enjoyment.
I want to point something out real quick because I have the game on paper box score pulled up for the Nebraska Northwestern game. That Nebraska kickoff or the onside kick, I think I found it here, was in the middle of the third quarter. It generated 2.5 EPA, and at the time for Northwestern because of how bad it was. And at the time, Northwestern had a 5% win probability. 5%.
Jesus.
I don't think we've introduced the fact that there's a guest yet this week because Robert's been patiently waiting in silence. And I've just been seeing him react with laughter and at one point falling out of the frame so far about the ridiculousness that was Nebraska Northwestern. I do want to give him a chance to chime in and say hello before we go 15 minutes and then just surprise everyone with surprise. We have a guest, but
thanks for having me. I did not get to see any of this game, but I got to see the post-game fallout. And I would just like to say that our FTRS mock draft for new coaches should not have included Scott Frost. I'm out.
Who drafted Scott Frost?
I'm going to have to look it up now. It was Joey, former illustrious site manager, Joey Weaver.
No.
That's why they call his podcast Basketball Conference, I think. But who's to say? In other news, before we dive in on volleyball, Chris Eubanks is live today by the time this comes out, Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. on Court 13 in New York at the U.S. Open. He did play through the qualifier draw, and he'll be playing one P. Martinez, and not being a professional tennis guy. I don't know who P. Martinez is, but I do know who Chris Eubanks is, so I will try and at least follow along on the live stats. Heaven knows that at least Jack and I can say for sure, and probably Akshay, got enough of live stats this weekend, though. So I'm a little disappointed that we did not get two streamed games, but we did get one, and that was Friday night against Ole Miss, the hosts of the Ole Miss eponymous Invitational.
He's not even going to let me do my own segue. Unbelievable. Let's talk about the volleyball performance at the Ole Miss Invitational in Oxford, Mississippi. You're right that most of this was done via live stats. The entire second game was not streamed. It was rough not being able to actually watch the action in front of our eyes, especially because the first game was entirely televised and also had a particularly interesting officiating situation. Wouldn't you say, Jake?
I would agree. There was a couple plays that very much went to replay, and I thought the call was pretty obvious both ways. I'm not going to say Tech got robbed every time or anything like that, because it's way too early in the season to be tinfoil hat about reffing. But there was just some pretty obvious misses, I guess, by the officials. Again, both ways on replays, where it's like, isn't that the point of challenges, to make sure that the call gets done right? And maybe my TV's not as good as theirs. I don't know. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but definitely interesting, but by no means the defining part of this match, right? Especially if we're talking set one, and set one, for those who did not watch, was, as we say, rough. Seeing the number 9 team in the country immediately drop their first set of the season 25-13, which for those of you still newer to the sport is not good. In fact, it's quite bad.
We don't beat teams that bad usually.
No, we don't. And theoretically, we're supposed to be pretty good. But so set one was pretty rough. And then I'd say, honestly, the fact that it was 3-1 the rest of the way, Tech did come out with the win at Ole Miss is kind of a miracle. All 3 of those second through fourth sets did go to bonus volleyball. You do have to win by 2 in volleyball. So it's first to 25, win by 2. So yeah, Tech did play better, but it certainly was a straight into the fire start to the season, I think, is a diplomatic way to put that.
Jake got his turn on the first game. Jack, I want to kick it over to you for the second game. Knowing that both you and Jake were obsessed over the live stats for this one, this was more like it for Georgia Tech, but This was a much better opponent in number 17 Illinois.
Yeah, no, it really was. I mean, Collier played 14 people in the first game. Like, just felt like I was watching the white and gold game all over again. I'm like, who's there? Who's on what? Who's playing for us? I think it's 5 or 6 people got their Tech debuts or just collegiate debuts in the first place. And then we swept. We got 3 Illinois in straight sets. Like, it was just it played normally. We only played 9 people. Elizabeth Patterson was, I think, would be the one that was like, okay, she got some playing time that probably wouldn't be expected, but only played the first set. And we shared the load too. Aaron Moss got 10 kills. Bergman got 12 compared to the first game where Bergman got 33.
Fifth most all time for a Tech player. We'll add 30,
and beat her own mark of 30 that she did last year against Notre Dame. That was 54% of the total points we scored. Like, it just, or no, not total points, total kills that we had. We did get outscored by Ole Miss too by 6 points.
I didn't think about that, but that's a fair point.
They beat us in total points 100-94.
It was not a particularly, to double back to that Ole Miss game, because I don't think there's much more to talk about on the Illinois one. That was, not really. Like I said, business as usual. But to double back to the Ole Miss game, also that. It was just very, like, it was not clean. Like, it was not a particularly clean performance by any metric. They had a ton of errors. Their hit percentage didn't come up to matching Ole Miss's until probably the middle of the second or the third set. And their side out percentage never came up to where Ole Miss was. Ole Miss was at like 65% for most of the match, and they didn't really get in edgewise until late on.
Robert, I know we brought you on to talk about football, but based on our general vibes around the program, the results, would you assume that, like, coming into this week, Tech went up, went down, or stayed the same in rankings and in the metrics?
All Tech people are just pessimists. So I'm going to assume that they're a lot better than you guys are saying.
Yes, they are. They went up. They went up from 9th in the country to 5th. This is their second highest program ranking ever. And we're out here talking like Ole Miss, the sky is falling.
Wait, to be fair, for a minute there, for that entire first set.
It did look bad.
It was bad.
Critical also is that number 7 Ohio State lost twice. And someone else in that top 8.
Washington lost.
Washington lost. They had lost, and then
Pitt fell down too.
And Pitt fell out.
And we're gonna have Minnesota against Texas on Wednesday in the 5 in a well, I don't know what the new ranking is. It would have been a 5 versus 2 last weekend if that was the ranking. But
Texas is 1 now.
Okay, so 1 versus something.
Texas
probably
is
a top
back,
5
baby.
matchup.
So yeah,
Welcome.
There's a
thank you, Joe Tessitore. But Julia Bergman named ACC Player of the Week for literally putting this team in her backpack and carrying them up Freshman Hill. I don't want that to get lost because 30 kills in that 33 kills in that first game is just absurd.
Yeah.
And
Also,
it was exactly what they needed.
Tech did open this year with 2 2021 NCAA tournament teams. So again, neither team were scrubs. And I think that brings us to next week's games when they make their home opener, right?
Indeed.
Absolutely. Let's talk about that schedule coming up this weekend. That is September 1st versus Dayton. I think that is Thursday.
It's this. I thought it was the 2nd. Oops.
Can I not read a calendar?
I have it as Friday.
This is a great
Friday too.
Fantastic podcasting. Cool. It's Friday, September 1st versus Dayton. That is at O'Keefe Gym as an 8 p.m. tip on ACC Network Extra if you are watching from home. The 3rd, that is a 5 p.m. tip on ACC Network Extra versus Arizona State. Consider watching that one. And on the 4th, Tech will play FIU at 2 p.m. also on ACC Network Extra. So no live stats following for anyone unless you're a sicko and doing that in your seat at the game. I know Jake and I probably will be. Again, we're psychopaths. It's kind of our thing. Anything else to cover in the volleyball set for this week?
Not that I know.
If you got nothing to do, go to the game and sell out the place.
Yeah. I'll be out of town Friday, Saturday, but maybe you'll catch us around on Sunday.
And they absolutely deserve the support, by the way. This is literally a top 5 team in the nation. But here is the real reason that we are here today. We're here to talk about football season that starts on Labor Day on September 5th at Mercedes-Benz Stadium versus Clemson at 7:30 p.m. 7 p.m. I don't know. This is something that
they kick it
8 Eastern.
It's not MLS timing, so that's why I don't know when it is. Usually if they say if it's 7:30, it kicks off at 8. Right. Good about that. But football actually kicks off on time, and so does our preview. We have Robert Binion here today, the owner and proprietor of the Bindex, the Binion Index Advanced Metric. Robert, how are you? How has the offseason been treating you? I know we already introduced you before, but I just want to get your thoughts before we start talking about Georgia Tech's season.
It's the longest and most painful offseason I've encountered, I think.
It's a lot of angst.
It's a lot of angst, and I don't even. There's not even a rainbow at the end of the, at the end of the storm. The program is in really bad shape, and I hope that we're not losing listeners by starting with that. But it's been angsty. People are fighting each other. People are arguing about season ticket sales and how bad they are. People are arguing about whether we need to redo Bobby Dodd with chairbacks and benches because there's just not a lot on the field to bring a lot of hope right now. And it feels like a season that we've got to get through to find out what's next more than a season that we're going to enjoy a whole lot on its own merits. That's where I am.
Yeah, I think this is one of those seasons where you sort of watch the clock, right?
Yeah.
You watch the countdown clock, and I think Chris Pascal, one of our other writers, said it best in one of his articles a couple of weeks ago. It's like their tension will be relieved, right? Tension will be relieved one way or another. It's just we gotta get there first, which means we gotta talk about the team and at least how they're going to set up this year. Let's start on the offensive side of the ball. We know we lost Jahmyr Gibbs to the transfer portal. There were a couple of other transfers out here as well, but I think he's sort of the linchpin one. The guy went to Alabama. He's listed as the number 2 transfer in the top 100 from The Athletic. What would you say? What effect does losing a player like that have on the way that you scheme offensively?
I think the biggest loss with Gibbs is his ability to catch the ball. I think that the rushing production, we can replace 80 to 90 to 100% of it. I think that the arrow routes that he would run, the swing routes that he would run, the wheel routes that he would run, I mean, those were probably the biggest source of Tech's explosive touchdowns last year. And I don't see anybody to backfill that. I rewatched the Carolina game and the Virginia game over the last week because it's that time of the year and that's what you do. And when we couldn't do anything, he takes a 6-yard throw, 75 yards, and that's gone, and it's not easily replaceable. I like Dante Smith. He's a good back. I think Dylan McDuffie is going to very adequately replace Jordan Mason. I think Hassan Hall is a question mark, but nobody has that take it to the house potential that Gibbs did. And when you combine that with the absolute lack of a game breaker on the outside, it's hard for me to see where the explosives come from on this offense.
Right. So who are you, if we think about the offense as sort of where are you getting your points, right? Sort of the Moneyball style of where are you getting your runs, where are you getting your hits, and how do you replace that sort of production of points or hits? This metaphor is getting very unwieldy. Who are you looking at to carry that load, or what combination of players are going to contribute to this offense to at least get back to that level?
I think you're going to see Jeff Sims run the ball a lot more in designed ways. Some numbers I looked at this offseason, over 2 seasons, 20 and 21, when he carries the ball, he's averaging 0.5 EPA per rush. So every time Jeff Sims runs the ball, Tech's expected offensive output goes up by a half point. Okay, that's sick. That's sick. That's a ton. We're going to have to do more of that, right? He's got an explosive element that can at least begin to fill one part of the Gibbs absence. So
correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not as much into the advanced stats as Robert and Akshay are. Aren't EPA expected on runs usually negative? Is that correct?
Right around 0 or negative. Exactly.
Okay. So us saying that Sims is a plus 0.5 when he touches the ball and gets moving, that's pretty substantial for, of a change from a normal run. Is that a good way to read it?
It's in the realm of Clinton Lynch, from the 14 to 16 era. I mean, that's the only other guy in the last 10 to 12 years of Tech football that's been in that kind of territory. It's way higher than what Gibbs is on any rush. So you've got to expand that part of the offense.
Where does that rank nationally?
It depends on the sample size cutoff that you use, but it'd be in the top 10%.
Okay.
That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about. I mean, obviously Sims is a threat on the ground, and I think you mentioned the UNC game. That's something that we did see in his return. A couple pretty monster runs there. Is that something? Then again, this is kind of reading the tea leaves a bit. Are we expecting Sims not only to obviously be the starter, but week 11, week 12, we thinking that we're going to be seeing Sims the whole way through, or is Pumachan or Zach Gibson or something like that going to get in the mix?
I think Gibson's the only guy that's got a chance of getting starter level snaps, and that really is going to depend on the 5 guys in front. It's hard for me to see a situation where they pull Sims unless it's an injury, which is probably related to the 5 guys up front, or if it's just an explosion of turnovers, which he tends to have a proclivity for when he's facing a lot of pressure. I mean, the delta in his numbers with pressure and without is enormous. And so if you get in a situation where you just can't block the other front, you may see Gibson get the kind of calm down series and see what he can do.
Yeah. See, that makes sense, because one thing I was thinking, just based on eye test, for maybe more of Robert's clarification than even our listeners, I'm more of the band, car, rah vibes kind of guy when it comes to football. And so I do a lot of eye test. I was a marching band kid in high school and a rec club guy in college. So that kind of does track with at least the more casual, not even, I wouldn't call myself a numbers or a scheme guy, just kind of like, Sims, sometimes that ball is free in a way you don't want it to be. So I think that would probably be my casual concern, other than just generally having a sense that our old offense, haven't seen a chip long offense, to be fair, but our old offense also felt pretty vanilla and limited. And I think that would kind of speak towards, opening Sims up more on the design run to take advantage of something like that if we get an advantage there.
And one of the things that was encouraging to me was looking at some numbers after we first hired Long, and the one stat that was consistent in all three of his offensive coordinator stops was that he raised the team's explosive play rate at all three stops. And so I think there's something in his mind where he's able to kind of take the personnel that he has and scheme that towards explosives. And I think, you're probably not going to see that with traditional downfield passing, given the wide receiver limitations that Tech has. But I do think you're going to have motion, you're going to have eye candy, you're going to have misdirection, you're going to have Sims in space. That's what he's going to try to do to raise the explosive rate this season is my hunch.
So you mentioned motion there, and I know that there's been a lot of work done at the NFL level, talking about the effect that motion and play action have on passing EPA and passing effectiveness. Is that do you see that similar effect at the college level? Has there been a lot of work done on that? Is that something that we can see Long implement and then see success from?
Yeah, it's not near as robust as at the NFL level, but I know Sports Info Solutions at least has done some work on that and definitely shown that there's, a statistically significant difference in pass plays that start with motion versus those that start with static formations. And just from some of the clips that you're able to glean from what Long likes to do, a lot of the big plays are starting with motion. And I think you're going to see probably, more Tech offensive plays than not feature some motion to try to get the defense moving, try to show Sims, are they in man? Are they in zone? What kind of information can we get and go from there?
And talking about that information, that I think being able to analyze pre-snap sort of informs what you're doing as the game progresses, right? Not just in motion, but also how you're play calling, how you're distributing the ball. You mentioned before we started recording that Long likes to make his offenses be 60% run, 40% pass. I think the stat that really popped out to me when we were talking about Dave Padnode's offense was that he was always in that 60% range for early downs rush rate. Do you see these things changing? Do you see maybe those rush situations maybe being a little less on early downs, maybe more on late downs? How does that distribution work out to you?
I think that's one of the key questions for the season. You mentioned, the tendency with Patnode. I'll just put a little bit more clarity on it. So if you're in a second and long situation, so you're 2nd and 8 or longer, on average, teams run the ball about 40% of the time in those situations. And the numbers tell us that the more you run in those situations, the worse you do on 2nd down and the worse situation you end up in on 3rd down, right? And Patnode ran the ball in about 50% of those situations. So he's essentially giving up offensive efficiency with those play calling decisions, right? By running the ball into the teeth of a defense that's already stopped you once, you're losing efficiency. Long has a track record for running more in unexpected situations and in those 2nd and long situations. Does that make sense? Right. So he prefers that 60-40 ratio, but not necessarily in those unadvantageous situations.
I think you were getting to where I wanted to ask I was reading a big article about Matt LaFleur today and how like him and Shanahan and McVay all will sometimes do like the 3 or the 2 yard play to fool you for the next play to get you to that big long jump ones, and seeing here, like, okay, clearly Chip Long's going to do some big play stuff. Do you think part of the hidden efficiency you can't really measure here that we might go for is that we'll use those seemingly not efficient plays to set up the ultra efficient ones later on. So maybe on average, your efficiency is fine, but like you're going to intentionally do a negative play to at least make it look like, okay, we don't know what we're doing, or something to make the big plays work.
Yeah, there's absolutely something to that. And that goes back to the conversation we're having about, motion. And so if you've got a receiver coming across with a jet motion and you fake the handoff to him and then you give it off tackle to your tailback, that may get you 3 yards the first couple times. And then the defense starts to expect that that's a fake every time. And then you pop him for a 15-yarder. He definitely likes to use, do the same motion, have the same kind of movement happening, but then do something different with it later on. So you're obviously not wanting the first option to be a negative play, right, but sometimes that's a trade-off you're willing to take for more explosion later on. And it does seem to me that Long has been willing to trade efficiency for explosion at most of his stops. So I think that's something you will see.
What other tactical things are you looking for this season, other than maybe that motion piece?
Quick game in the passing offense. You've heard a lot of conversation this offseason about Sims getting the ball out quickly, about kind of reducing the number of reads that he's making to help him out. And I think you're going to see, these combinations of slant routes and flat routes. You're going to see a corner with a little out coming underneath it. You're going to see a smash route where you've got this outside receiver breaking out, inside receiver breaking in, and you're doing things where he has to really read one defender and make a quick decision. And I think you're going to see more of an emphasis on that to both, mitigate what's probably going to be a weak offensive line again, what's probably going to be a relatively limited receiving core in terms of getting separation down the field. And so if those aren't your strengths, then getting the ball out quickly, letting your quarterback just, hit and go, potentially giving him a run option off of those things. I think you're going to see, plays that are happening in less than 3 seconds versus more in that 5, 6, 7 range.
Let's move on to talking about metrics, since, it's Georgia Tech. We're all metrics people. When you're talking about KPIs for the season, what specifically are you looking for?
I've got 4 that I put out in our advanced stats week this summer. And I'll hit those quickly, but you guys tell me what needs more color for it. The first one is completion percentage over expectation. And so if I'm an average quarterback and I'm throwing the ball, towards the right hash, 8 yards down the field, I would expect to complete that pass, say 62% of the time. And one of the things that we can do is we can evaluate whether a quarterback completes more or less, passes than we would expect based on where they're throwing the ball. The last 2 seasons, Sims has been a couple percentage points below average in that. If he can get just 2 or so points above average, that would be an enormous boon for this offense. It might not.
It's basically strokes gains, but for passing in a sense.
Exactly right. Okay. Exactly right. Yep. And I think that you can't unlink that, from other parts of the offense. And so the next thing I'm going to look at is the amount of pressure that the offensive line is allowing. And so again, just to, give you context there, the average in college football is that you give up pressure on about 27% of your pass plays. Tech was way above that in 2020, just slightly above that last year, about 28%. The line was actually, better last year for sure. If we can get that, again, just below average, 26% or lower, you're going to see, less of those disaster plays. You're going to see more opportunity for Sims to find a guy when he breaks open instead of having to tuck and, or instead of, hide and run. The small margins there are going to make a big difference. So those are 2 of the huge things I'm going to be watching every game. The next 2 I'll give you, one of them we already talked about. How often are we running the ball in those second and long situations? It's got to be 40% or less. You've got to give yourself a chance to make a first down on second down. The best way to be good at third downs is to avoid them. And you normally don't do that when you run the ball on 2nd and 9. That normally gives you 3rd and 7, which is really, really hard to convert. So we need to run the ball less than 40% of the time on second and long. And then the last thing that I'd like to see, and this may sound a little counterintuitive, but I want to see us throw the ball a little bit further down the field on average. And a lot of that is because we don't have Gibbs. we were able to be successful on some shorter throws last year because Gibbs was able to find space, to break tackles, to create something out of nothing. And so the average throw in college football goes about 9.2 yards past the line of scrimmage. Sims was at 8.3 last year. I want that number above 9. We've got to be putting him in position to make plays without the pass catcher having to do it.
And that seems quasi inefficient too, because Sims has a gun for an arm, and it's like if you got to use what you have, and it feels like obviously our wide receiver core isn't breaking the NCAA by any means, but at the very least, finding ways to get him space makes a lot of sense to at least utilize that. Also, of these metrics, though,
good. He's been pretty good on throws that go 20 or more yards past the line of scrimmage, and I think we've just got to give him more of a chance to do that. This is Kiefer Milligan is our old school film consultant on the site, and this is probably he and I's biggest disagreement. He thinks that Sims' biggest weakness is the deep ball, and I think it's intermediate middle for sure. And if we can give him more chances to just throw where there's only one defender deep on the outside, I think you're going to see the efficiency go up.
Right. How likely do you think these metrics are going to happen?
Oh, that's not a good sign.
I think these are more likely than the defensive ones I'm going to give you.
Okay.
How's that?
That's good enough.
Yeah.
I was going to say maybe it says something about old school film guy that Vibes Man agrees with him about the deep ball, but you're here as the expert, so I defer and I choose not to start any fights on our podcast.
The numbers don't lie, Jake. The numbers have never lied.
Never.
No one has ever misled anyone with statistics. Not once.
It only happens 42% of the time.
There you go.
Well, Robert teased the segment on defense. We'll be right to that after this quick break.
As you guys probably know by now, but if you are a new listener, maybe you don't, we do support Section 103 here on this podcast. They're great friends of ours. We're great friends of theirs. They make great quality tech apparel. It's very soft. I am trying to come up with one in particular to focus on for today. I had stickers on the list, but that felt a little bit disappointing given that this is the football preview, and I should pick something a little bit more football-y, but they do make nice stickers, so go check those out. In terms of football-specific content, there is the State of Georgia shirt with a football over Atlanta. I think that one's pretty cool. And then there's also some national champions gear that I think is pretty unique. The 1990s retro style gray shirt, hoodie, crew neck, all available. And then the jackets with the GT helmet and the national champions, those 4 years on there are both very cool and very high on my personal list. In terms of where to find them, unfortunately, they are doing 20% off today. As we record this, I assume it ends at midnight, but as always, they are available at section103.com, and they do periodic stuff like this, so always keep an eye out for little promos and things like that. It's great to work with them, and they do make very, very high quality Georgia Tech apparel, so go ahead and check them out, section103.com, at section103 on Twitter as well. Anything else, guys, before we go back to talk about the defense?
They have volleyball gear for all your dates at O'Keefe.
Yes, Point Tech. As far as slogans go, maybe the one that makes the most sense of any slogan I've ever heard. So, Point Tech.
Speaking of points and not allowing them, let's talk about the Georgia Tech defense in this next segment. There have been a couple of departures on this side of the ball, too. Robert's favorite player, Jordan Dominic, has left the Georgia Tech program. He is now at Arkansas. So let's talk the same way we did about Jahmyr Gibbs. Let's talk about how to replace his production on the defensive side of the ball. And Robert, you pointed out Keon White as a key contributor for this year. Tell us a little bit about why.
So if you don't know the Keon White backstory, he went to Old Dominion. He was a tight end for a year. They moved him over to defensive end in 2019, and he absolutely wrecked worlds. We're talking he had more tackles for a loss in 2019 than like Tech's whole defense did last year combined. I mean, killing people. And this wasn't just a, quality of opponent thing. They played both Virginia and Virginia Tech that year, and he had 5 tackles for loss across those 2 games. You watch his film, and he's strong. He knows where to be. He can bull rush. He's got, pass rush moves on the outside. He looks the part more than anybody that Tech's had on the outside since Derek Morgan, like no question about it. But Old Dominion decided not to play football in 2020. So then he decides to transfer down to Atlanta. Super excited about it. I think I wrote like 3 articles about him last offseason. And then he breaks his leg playing basketball. I believe it was in June of last year. Comes back, plays very limited snaps in 4 or so games. Clearly not himself, hasn't been able to fully recover, hasn't been able to fully get back into shape. So fast forward a year, from all accounts, he's in magnificent shape. He's ready to go, ready to make his NFL case. Word starts to trickle out. He's playing with a club on his hand. He has a fracture somewhere. It's unclear if he's going to have this removed the entire season. Some say it hasn't slowed him down at all. Some say that it's really, hurting his ability to get around offensive tackles. If anybody is going to produce any kind of havoc up front, he's the guy, bar none. Nobody's close. He's 6'4", 280. He's a monster. He can move. Is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be his old self? If he is, the defense really could be different than it has been the last 2 years. If he's not his old self, I'm really worried. As much as one defender can really, dictate the fortunes of the whole side of the ball, he's closer to a quarterback type value for Tech's defense in particular than I think, you would normally see out of one guy.
I think it's interesting because I think soccer is where we sort of think about it as a weak link sport, right? Where one player that's not at the same level could really get keyed in on and disrupt your entire tactical setup for a game. But it's kind of the same in football, where if you have one defender that is not themselves, you just keep running and running and running at him, and that you're probably going to find success. I think another piece of that, or I guess a thought that branches off of that, is that this happened a lot with Georgia Tech secondary last year. Either there was a player that was missing, or there was a player that was not having a good day, and opposing quarterbacks would continue going over the top over and over. I think one of the big examples of this were the Duke and I think the NC State games, where Duke and NC State were just slinging it every single time. Do you see what improvement do you see there? What I guess signs of progress, if any, are there?
So the 2 guys who were by far the biggest culprits, I don't know if we need to name them. They had single-digit numbers. They're not around anymore. Go watch the tape if you want to figure out exactly who I'm talking about. I think I'm cautiously optimistic. I think Jalen King is a significant upgrade at one of the safety spots. I'm really high on him. I'm not high on Derek Allen. He graded worse than any of the guys who started last year. The one thing that I have more hope with is that I think he's getting beaten out. Player that you probably know is Miles Brooks. He's now going by Miles Brooks. It's what he went by his whole life until got to college, and he wants people to call him what people called him growing up. So we're going to call him Miles. It seems like he's in the process of beating out Derek Allen, and that would be really hopeful for me because that could go a long way in eliminating that weak link that you talked about. I think Miles Sims and Zamari Walton on the outside. They're 2 guys that I like. They're probably not NFL corners, but they're not disasters. They're not completely in the wrong spot most of the time. There was one play against Virginia Tech where I don't know what Walton was looking at, but we'll just kind of throw away last year. Sims and Walton are going to be better than the combination we started last year. King is better than Wanye in pass coverage. And if Miles Brooks can not be like Tariq Carpenter, we could be a lot more solid on the back end. I think Caleb Edwards is an upgrade over Wesley Walker, most likely. So you've got a chance. You've got a chance. I don't think there's a lot of depth. If you get Keenan Johnson in there, I get pretty concerned. If King's out of the game, I get pretty concerned. But I think at least to start the game, you're not going to be giving up those just what in the world just happened kind of plays like we were last year.
And is part of that the impact of having a different, a retooled secondary and defensive staff?
It's addition by subtraction, man. I don't know what to say. I mean, the what synergy is when two things work together for the good. What's the opposite of that? Because that's what you had last year between the coaches and the guys in that safety room. I mean, it was a complete disaster where, there was this enabling happening of the older guys who felt entitled to play. They got worse as their careers went on. The coaches did nothing to change what was happening on the field, to change who was on the field. And so I think that the removal of the people from the position room as well as the people from the coaching room is absolutely for the good in this particular case. Even if the guys that you're replacing them with are average, that is so much better. Because in case you all didn't know, I'll remind you, there are 130 football teams in the football subdivision. Georgia Tech was 130th in EPA against the pass last year. That is the worst. We were the worst. So you can't get worse than that.
You really can't. Well, this year you can.
Incredible.
James Madison is now an FBS, so it's 131. Technically this year,
yes,
you can get worse.
Sam Houston State, maybe too. Our old friend Jordan Yates down there.
Ooh.
It could be possible. But let's spin that a certain way, right? I think there were different shades of this defense that you saw depending on whether they were playing zone in the secondary, man in the secondary. What have you done a lot of sort of splits on that? What did that synergy is maybe not the best word here, but what did that difference look like?
Yeah, and I'll give credit to David Hale, who writes mostly about the ACC for ESPN. He's got more, specific charting data at his fingertips, and he's put some of this together in man coverage situations, which a lot of times what you're going to be doing if you're bringing pressure. You have less guys in coverage. Tech was like just below average. I mean, it was it wasn't anything to get excited about, but it was fine. In zone situations, Tech was like a standard deviation worse than anybody else that they measured, right? And so what that says is, if you're playing zone in pass coverage, is you have to be aware of the space that you're, required to cover. You have to trust that if a receiver passes from your space to somebody else's space, that somebody next to you, in front of you, behind you is going to be able to pick them up. And our defense was utterly incapable of doing that. Either you never pick the guy up yourself, or you'd keep chasing them when they entered somebody else's zone. And so that's where you saw those just absolutely confounding plays where nobody be within 10, 12, 18 yards of a receiver. And that's really what led to that, 130 out of 130 number.
Do you think other teams were keying on that, right? Like waiting or trying to scan the way that Georgia Tech was setting up to key in on when they were playing zone and then adjust accordingly?
Yeah, no question about it. You see the trends that you see from the early part of the year to the latter part of the year. We were like first half of the year, we're giving up 0.2 EPA per pass. Second half of the year, you're in the 0.7, 0.8 range. I mean, teams are gaining almost a point every time they're throwing the ball over the second half of our schedule. And I think what you see is that, that they were very aware of where those weak points were. And they were very aware that if you overload a zone with multiple receivers, absolutely one of them was going to break free. You could count on it. You don't even have to make that good of a throw, and it's a big play.
Let's talk a little bit more about that man coverage, and specifically about the pressure that they were bringing. We talked a little bit earlier about Jordan Dominic is no longer with the program, and we talked a little bit about Keon White and his responsibility to replace Jordan Dominic up front. Who else stands out to you as someone that can help shoulder that load?
Yeah, Charlie Thomas is the first guy that comes to mind for sure. And he's at that second level on the defense. He's a linebacker that does a lot of blitzing, a lot of bringing pressure. The last 2 years, combined, he's by far Tech's leader in tackles for loss, havoc plays overall. He's a guy that you saw absolutely going off the first part of the year. He was the highest ranked linebacker in the country, according to PFF through the UNC game, maybe even for another week after that. And then from what I've heard, he had a nagging injury really the second half of the year. He kept playing, but he wasn't nearly as effective. He's apparently put on about 10 pounds, which for him is enormous. I think you're going to see him get used in some really, creative, havoc creating kind of ways. And you don't have to worry so much about, can the guys up front get a push on their own? You're going to create pressure with a guy like Charlie Thomas. And I think you're also going to see Trinilius Tatum, a guy who's a true freshman last year. I think the coaches really like him. I think they're going to do what they can to get him on the field to be a complement to Thomas at that second level as well.
I think this is when you're talking about bringing pressure and then also bringing a lot of pressure and then also having man coverage. This is sort of what we were promised, right, in 2019. Absolutely. This is the jamming receivers at the line of scrimmage, playing really aggressive press man coverage, and then also bringing a lot of pressure up front. And maybe, the chance is small, but maybe this is the year we sort of see some of this come together.
And we've seen it in these small little, whether it's the UNC game where you have 10 tackles for loss in the first half. That was a bad offensive line, but that's still, that's more than you would get against an FCS team. And then it's like they just stop. So, I said I rewatched the UNC and UVA games back to back, and it's just night and day. Against UVA, we're trying to drop 8 every single snap, so you never get pressure. And there's always 3 guys who are 6 yards away from the receiver, none of them doing anything impactful. The only way this defense succeeds is if you gamble, you take risks, you bring pressure. There's enough on the back end to hold up in man coverage, and you've got to create negative plays. And we just don't have the dudes who are going to do that one-on-one. You got to be creative with scheme. You got to be creative with angles and twists and all that kind of stuff.
Like we did with the offense, let's put some metrics on that. How can they be more effective this year? What are we looking for in terms of KPIs?
Sure. Let's start with the pass defense. That's what killed everything last year. We mentioned it was the worst in the country. To put a fine number on it, in terms of your pass defense, an average pass defense gives up 0.05 expected points per pass attempt, right? So, just over 0. Tech was at 0.45 last year. The next worst was 0.35. It was unbelievable, this gap. The year before, we were at 0.08, which is below average, but is not going to kill you. You've got to get back to that level, right? That's 80th, 90th in the country. If you can't get there, you're starting dead. You're drawing dead from the get-go. So you've got to have a defense that can just avoid getting destroyed with the pass. So let's be in the 0.06, 0.08 range, per pass.
Not to make the 0.45 sound any worse than it actually is, but where does that compare? I know we were 130th and another thing here, but were other teams just not using the secondary efficiently that poorly as well? Who are we talking about that's comparable in terms of that school that we shouldn't be even in league with?
Oh yeah. We were next to New Mexico State, which is usually a bad sign. You're not where you want to be if you're next to New Mexico State. UConn and UMass were in the neighborhood. This is what we're talking about. teams that are considering not having FBS football programs in future years, right? That's the company that we were in. Okay. It's not good. It's not the neighborhood you want to live in. So just a quiz for you guys. Let's go to the next thing that I love to look at, right? Which is havoc rate. Okay. So a havoc play on defense is a tackle for loss, a forced fumble, an interception, or a pass breakup. So an average defense creates a havoc play 21% of the time, right? So do you want to guess where Tech was last year in that number?
I have it in front of me, so I'm not going to guess, but Jake or Jack, do you have any guesses here?
I assume it's not going to be great, but again, I don't have a lot of context.
Yeah, so let's just use round numbers, right? So let's say 20 is average, 15 is bad, 25 is really good. So we checked in at a solid 10% last year. 10% of plays were creating disruption. We're creating havoc. 10%.
Oh, I remember tracking this. I remember tracking this for Game on Paper, and I think repeatedly I saw like 8%, 5%. There were a couple that were at 0. It was not fun. It was not fun at all to read those numbers off.
And so when you're playing a style of defense where you're depending on the guys up front to create those kind of plays and the guys, on the back end to match in zone, and you're only doing that 10% of the time, the other 9 is not going to go too well. So that number's, again, guys, we're just looking for average here. I don't feel like I'm asking too much. Am I asking too much? Give me average 20%, please.
I think that would be a world of difference. So,
and the final thing is just, the percentage of pass plays where you're creating pressure. And it's a similar story. Average is about 27%, like we said, on offense. And last year we were about 22. And again, folks, just give me average. And so you're going to get these numbers from us every week. Akshay is going to be writing about the offense. I'm going to be writing about the defense. We will let you know, how are these going? Are we hitting our KPIs? If we hit some of these numbers, guys, and the 6-6 becomes a real thing. But if we're not hitting these numbers, then you're in same old territory.
Yeah, I think I'd like us to hit the numbers just based on that.
And, the reason you got to hit the numbers is because the schedule ain't easy, right? The schedule is a bear.
Oh, he did the segue for me. I'm getting segue jumped here. So, like you said, let's talk about the schedule. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the Bindex and how it puts out these. We're going to talk, for each of these games, we're going to talk win probabilities. Can you give us a little bit of insight into how those are calculated? A little bit of insight into maybe just how the Bindex is calculated, then flows into win probabilities as well.
Sure. Yeah. For the preseason edition of the numbers we're putting out, we're using EPA numbers from the past 3 seasons, and they're weighted differently. The most recent season has the most weight, and on down into 20 and 19, and then we have an adjustment to those raw numbers based on who you played, a schedule type adjustment, and then we have one final adjustment that's based on your returning production, right? And what percentage of these important things are you bringing back, or are you bringing in from the transfer portal, or are they going out through the transfer portal? And so that enables us to come up with a number for each team, and that number tells you how would you stack up against an average FBS team on a neutral field. And so Tech's number for that is about a -8. So you would be about an 8-point underdog against an average team on a neutral field based on what's happened over the last couple of years and based on who's coming in, who's coming back. We have that number for each team to start the season. And then those numbers are going to update each week. During the season, we're continuing to put a heavy weight on expected points and adjusting that for schedule. And then we're also using a couple of kind of more specific numbers on offense and defense that I've found have some statistical significance for predicting, in-season performance. And so we'll be updating as the year goes. If Tech plays well, -8 is going to go up. If we play poorly, it's going to stay the same or go down, right? And so each week, these win probabilities, the point spread that we would generate for each game, you're going to see those change a little bit just based on what's going on in the actual games, as you would hope to. But what we can do is we can take, Team A's rating, and we can take Tech's rating, subtract them, get a difference, and then we give an extra 2.5 points to whoever's at home, because that's generally, historically what home field is worth in college football. And then we use our bell curve normal distribution chart, and we can generate a win probability from there. And those numbers are generally pretty small as we look across the next 3 months, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about some of these. Let's go line item by line item here. Let's start with the Labor Day game versus Clemson. What you got for me?
4%, single digits. I think the gold-colored glasses Tech fan, and I've been there so many years. I just can't go there this year. Sees coordinator changes, sees the quarterback weakness at Clemson, and thinks that this is a winnable game. The gentleman on Clemson's defensive line will have something else to say about that. I don't have my hopes up for next Monday, and I don't think that next Monday will tell us too much about how the season's actually going to go.
My bold prediction is that this is how we'll do better. We will face less than 4 quarterbacks compared to what we did 2 years ago in this game.
The less I can think about tweeting that game is the better, I think, because that was absolutely miserable.
I live in Utah. I get to go to like one game every 3 years. Of course, that game I was at. Way to go.
Oh, no.
An aside before we continue going through the schedule, I was live tweeting that game, and also the Braves were playing that night in the NLCS. It was the 20 season. It was the NLCS. So not only was it just an awful football game, and to the point where there was some arrival or other SB Nation blogs asking me what I was drinking to get through it. There was I had to watch the Braves blow a 3-1 lead later that night. So,
oh God, I forgot.
I think it was game 5. So it was in progress, but like you could see the writing on the wall on that one. Let's talk about the next game, which also kind of has writing on the wall on it. It's Western Carolina. Most people would say this is a pretty linchpin easy win, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and my number on this is 95%. I don't really want to be as precise with that because I don't run the numbers the same way for FCS teams. So let's just say that you better win, and you better win comfortably.
Speaking of interesting scenarios for wins, Ole Miss 22%. Tell me a little bit about that.
So, the quarterback is gone, but they bring in this guy Jackson Dart. He was at USC last year, and he's a 5-star kid who's actually from about 20 miles from where I live. He's from Utah. Everybody thought he was going to go to BYU. USC kind of comes in later on in the recruitment process. He's good, man. And you pair Kiffin with a legit quarterback, and their offense is going to be really good, which is not necessarily what we want to see. I think Tech can score on Ole Miss, with some ability, but I don't see us holding them under 38, something like that.
I just personally am excited to see it being at Bobby Dodd. I know that, it seems we get, the Clemsons, the UGAs, the usual suspects in Bobby Dodd a lot. And, it kind of brings to mind playing Vanderbilt a couple of years back at Bobby Dodd, but something like Tennessee would have been really cool in that setting. Then again, that was before the mayhem at Mercedes-Benz. But I think the Ole Miss just being different is something that we don't get to see a lot. And I know that the numbers may say we only have like a 4th to a 5th of a shot of winning the game. But I mean, just from variety's sake, with only 12 games in college football, I don't think we see nearly enough variety either. So this will at least, and it'll be early enough in the season that I think that I'll still be, quite excited. So just in general,
I am all in on the vibes that you just described. I think it's a super fun game to play. I'm glad we're doing it. I just wish we were better and it was more of a 50-50 shot.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that they're not doing this in Mercedes, because this very well could have been the appealing one. So like, oh yeah, let's throw the bigger. Clemson's Clemson, but like, hey, let's throw some variety in there. But it's like, okay, no, let's leave the fun one for the actual home crowd where we have more control there.
Yeah. Let's move on to a different or a fun home crowd in a different way at UCF. You got 12% on this one, Robert.
Yeah, I think the next two are probably where, your kind of average fan would maybe disagree the most with what my numbers are saying. 12% for UCF, 11% for Pitt. They're both on the road. The bounce house is actually a pretty tough place to play, even if it's kind of funny looking sometimes. Malzahn has Plumlee slated to start at quarterback. You're going to see that Nick Marshall kind of offense. They're going to move quickly. The quarterback's going to run the ball a lot. There's going to be misdirection. There's going to be power plays with, the quarterback following. And I think we're going to have a really hard time stopping them too. That's going to become a bit of a broken record as we keep going here.
It's also really weird that they're sending us to, the schedule sends us to Orlando and then immediately after Pittsburgh. You cannot get worse in terms of travel distance there.
For the third straight game too, you get to face a transfer quarterback who's super talented, another USC kid, Keaton Slovis. The combination that you're going to see there is a kid named Kanata Mumpfield is a receiver transfer from Akron. I thought he was going to come to Tech with Zach Gibson. He went to the more stable passing outfit up there in the Rust Belt. They're going to be really good. They're going to throw the ball really well. Their defense is really, really good. Kalijah Cansey, Habakkuk Baldonado. Gosh, if we can block them, I'll be amazed. I don't feel good about that one at all.
Let's move on to homecoming, the second week of October versus Duke. Bindex has this one at 70%.
Yeah, baby. Let's go. The Fighting Elcos are going to stink. You'll hear more about that in my sickos pick. I think they're going to be really bad. We should win by 3 touchdowns.
Duke isn't they've surprised us in the past. The 2014 Duke game always comes to mind for me. That one was a stinker. Let's move on to UVA. That's a Thursday nighter, the peak ACC window. You have that one at 38%.
Subjectively, I think that's low. I'm actually going to be at this game, so let's go for 51%. If you remember the game last year, we jumped out to an early lead, and then Brennan Armstrong did absolutely whatever he wanted. They had 600 some odd yards. It was 0.75 EPA per pass, just one of those really bad defensive games. And then Sims, mounted this kind of crazy late comeback. We get 2 onside kicks, end up losing by a score. They bring back everything at quarterback and receiver. They don't bring back as much up front. In fact, I think all 5 offensive line starters are gone. So, you'll see their offense probably in the neighborhood to a little bit worse than what you saw last year. Their defense still isn't going to be good. It's got to be a track meet kind of game. It's probably 45-42 if you're going to win, but it should be a fun one.
Let's move on to Florida State. Florida State, seen them a couple of times in the last couple of years. This one, the Bindex has at 16% win probability.
Yeah, again, that feels a little low to me, but I do think Norvell is kind of slowly, quietly building something over there. I mean, they played Duquesne on Saturday, but wow, are they dominant. Our friend on Twitter, CFB Numbers, he's a big Florida State guy, and he put together some stuff. This was Florida State's best rushing performance in like 12 years. They were just absolutely dominant. I think Alex Atkins has ironed out some of those offensive line issues. Not coincidentally, Alex Atkins is on my list of coaches to watch this season. More about that later. Jordan Travis is the kind of fully unleashed quarterback runner that I hope we can make Jeff Sims this year. So call it a broken record, but we're going to have a hard time stopping them.
Speaking of hard time stopping, and especially stopping, recently hired coaches and their offenses and defenses, Virginia Tech is up next. The Bindex has this one at 25%.
I think Virginia Tech has just an enormous standard deviation this year. I have no idea what to do. A lot of transfer activity. I mean, what are the vibes? Like, what do we think's going on in Blacksburg?
See, that's where I try and pick up. I try and fill the gaps in terms of, but in terms of listening to Joey and Mike over on Basketball Conference, just because, they bring in an expert for each team. I know we say no free ads, but I think we can give our friends free ads. But in terms of just like the confidence I got from listening to that podcast did not match my impression of really anything I've seen from the program since, I guess, 2016. The last year Virginia Tech was like good. I mean, I get it. Maybe there's some like recruiting transfer pickups, but I don't know. Brent Pry doesn't have he was a coordinator at Penn State and did a fine job, but like, I just don't think it's as turnkey as a lot of people seem to think it is. And I'm not really sure where people got that impression. I know we just went past the Florida State, but I haven't been super high on Florida State either. Again, I'm more of a vibes and listening guy. And it seems like their fan base is expecting, 6, 7, 8, even 9 are here sometimes wins. And that just doesn't seem to be, reflective of Florida State's 5 wins last year or Virginia Tech's very okay year that they had. Like it wasn't like the cupboard's fully stocked. And if anything, I've heard that Virginia Tech, at least when Pry took the job, / accounting for people leaving, was a situation, even more bereft of some of those big names than someone like Tech. And we were pretty notable for losing established players year over year. Obviously the Gibbs thing is the frontliner, but we talked Dominic, he was a really important player too. And that's just a handful. And a lot of those players did go to other Power 5 schools. So if you're saying in one breath that Virginia Tech is, more bare than Georgia Tech, but also that there's this expectation that they have, triple the odd. I don't know. It's late at night. That 75 to 25 in their favor for winning. That just doesn't really make any sense at all to me. And the fact that numbers are rating them at, relatively similar rates to, we'll get to Miami in a second, but like an Ole Miss who, was a Sugar Bowl team last year. Like, I just don't think that makes any sense in my head. I know that there's not really a conclusion there either, but like, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Let's move on to let's do Miami and North Carolina in a bushel, shall we? Miami's at 23%, at North Carolina at 12%. Miami's a weird one. Miami is going through a little bit of like a studs up rebuild with NIL and Mario Cristobal and program alignment, quote unquote. And then UNC is just like there. I have no idea what to think of UNC and also this 12% number. Can you fill in the gaps on these two teams for us, Robert?
Start with quarterbacks, Tyler Van Dyke, Drake May. They're both really good from what I've watched, read, seen, heard. They're going to throw the ball all over the yard. With Miami, your defensive line is entirely made up of transfers. So it's a huge gamble. Really don't know what you're going to get there. Receiving core kind of same way. With UNC, it's like 4- and 5-star freshmen and sophomores. So you probably feel a little bit more confident, but you also haven't seen the production. The Coastal's the Coastal, man. I mean, these teams are huge in their variance. And so, this is where, like, okay, if Tech does have a 2 standard deviations above what we expect kind of outcome, like these become winnable games, but you can't ignore the baseline for what we should expect for Tech, because these other teams aren't world beaters, but the last 3 years.
I mean, the UNC being a 0.12 might shock me even more than the Virginia Tech one, because I'm under the impression that that's a pretty, not winnable. There's not a lot of games on the schedule that are purely winnable, right? Like, I think we can all acknowledge that. But like, I know that Akshay and I both watched that UNC game last year with our own eyes, and I don't know what fundamental changes Mac Brown going from Bateman to Chiswick is going to do to stop. They couldn't stop a pad note offense, and you're expecting that to maybe get better with Long. Like,
I want to say the bigger problem there was the offensive line more than anything else.
That is fair, but
the defense in that game was able to get a lot of push.
And Howell fumbled 3 times, like 6 inches from the ground. If those are blown dead, you're looking at a really different outcome.
That is fair. I just want to get a second memorable game of the Jeff Collins era, right? Like, we got the one.
Well, let's talk about week 12. That's going to be memorable because 2% is higher than I would give it.
Yeah.
I don't even want to talk about that. We're going to move on. We are absolutely going to move on. We're not talking about that one. Let's move on. Let's talk about the ACC. Let's talk about the tasting menu for this week. What I want to do here is I have the entire slate of ACC and ACC affiliated teams that are playing football this weekend. I want to go through these blind rapid fire one by one and hear what y'all have to say. So let's get started with the Backyard Brawl coming back at 7 p.m. on ESPN on Thursday, September 1st. Jake, who do you have in this one?
I got Pitt.
Jack?
Blind rapid fire.
Pitt.
Robert?
Round it out. Pitt, baby.
I really want to be a contrarian, but yeah, Pitt is going to take this one. Next one.
A contrarian?
This is rapid fire. Jake Grant, VMI at Wake. Robert, you're up first.
Wake in this one, but I'm real worried until Hartman comes back.
Jack.
Yeah, same. I want to see Wake be good, so please win.
Wait, and you're Jake. Worried about VMI? Give me Wake all day. It's a Power 5 team. VMI.
No Hartman there. That's a 7:30 kick on ACC Network, our beloved ACC Network. Let's move on to Friday. Virginia Tech plays Old Dominion. That's a 6 p.m. kick on ESPNU. Robert, you're up first.
If Jake's right, ODU, but I think Lippy Sue wins it close.
Jake, what you got?
I'm going to go with Jake being right.
Jack.
Virginia Tech, please.
I'm going to take ODU because I think it's very funny whenever Virginia Tech loses to ODU, which is like their version of the Duke phenomenon with their fan base. Speaking of Duke, Temple at Duke, 7:30, ACC Network. Jake, you're up first.
I'm going to take Duke, even though I think Duke's going to be like super bad.
Rapid fire.
Give me Duke.
Robert.
Be an ACC homer.
I think Duke's year -2 here and Temple's year 0. Give me Temple.
And Jack.
Yeah, I like Temple too. Duke's not a football school. Come on.
Duke also replacing Coach K this year, which talk about narrative central there. Duke football can't hide anymore. Let's talk Saturday. Let's move on to Saturday. North Carolina State at ECU starts at noon on ESPN. Robert, you're up first.
NC State, closer than the experts think.
Jake.
I'm going to go NC State.
And Jack.
I'll make this one of the upsets. Give me the Pirates. Give me the Pirates.
We talked about UNC earlier. They are headed to Boone to play App State also at noon, but on ESPNU. I'm going to go first here. App is going to win this one by 10. There's no way UNC wins this one. Robert, you're up first.
I am all in with you on that. I think they are going to be way too much up front. App State.
Jack.
Yes, same. If App State doesn't win this, the universe doesn't make sense.
Jake, you're last.
Give me App.
Oh boy, we can't go. Oh boy, someone's gonna meme us on the internet for that one. Let's move over to the Northeast. Rutgers visits BC in a Big East battle. That's not really at all the Big East anymore. That's also a nooner on ACC Network. Robert, you're up first.
BC, because they have Dracovic and Rutgers does not have a quarterback.
Jake.
Give me BC.
And Jack.
Yep, Dragovic's good. Rutgers not.
Yep. Let's move down the Eastern Seaboard to Charlottesville. Richmond takes on Virginia. That is a 12:30 kick on probably the RSN. Ugh, don't even want to think about the RSN. Jack, you're up first.
Despite my uncle going to Richmond, I'm picking Virginia.
Robert?
Yeah, Armstrong's way too much. UVA big.
And Jake?
UVA.
Damn it, it's way too easy to pick these games in week one. Bethune-Cookman at Miami is the 3:30 on ACC Network. Robert, you're up first for this one.
Oh, body bag. Oh, Van Dyke plays a quarter and a half.
I feel bad for asking about this game personally, but Jack.
Give me the Coral Gables Football Club, sir.
Woof. Jake, you're last. I assume I know what your answer is.
The U, baby.
Yikes. And our one ACC affiliated game for now, Notre Dame and Ohio State. This should actually generate some discussion. This is a 7:30 kick on ABC. Jake, as our Midwestern correspondent, you're up first.
The Midwest.
Rapid fire.
I'm going to take Ohio State.
There we go. Robert, you're up next.
I'm super high on Ohio State this year. My numbers are higher than I'd like on Notre Dame, so Ohio State wins, Notre Dame covers.
And Jack.
I saw a thing today that Notre Dame's basically only lost to playoff teams in the last 4 years or so, like their 7 losses, if it's not a playoff team, which includes Cincinnati as a playoff team, they basically went out. Ohio State's very much a playoff team, so I think this is still going to be Ohio State just purely because it's in the shoe.
Your Sicko's ACC candidate of the week is Louisville at Cuse. That's the 8 p.m. on ACC Network. Jake, you're up first. Rapid fire.
Give me the Cards.
Robert.
Week 1 Anxiety Bowl. Malik Cunningham's way better than anybody Syracuse has. Louisville.
I have no idea who Cuse's quarterback is to begin with. So Jack, finish us off.
Why pick the Cuse for anything? That's not hockey. Do they have hockey? Is that what I should pick them
They
for?
do not have hockey.
They got women's hockey.
Title IX, baby. I'm assuming that Jake is taking the Cardinals, your final ACC affiliated game of the weekend.
I already said I was taking the Cardinals. So
I meant Jack. Sorry. Your names are way too similar. We're moving on. FSU versus LSU in NOLA at 7:30 on ABC on Sunday. Jake, you're up first. Rapid fire.
Florida State.
Robert.
LSU.
Ooh, that's a spicy one. Jack.
Under the Lights in Death Valley week 1.
Not in Death Valley.
In the Superdome.
NOLA.
Yeah, I'm still
Superdome.
That's right. Okay, never mind. Yeah, still LSU.
I'm unfortunately told by my producer that we have to pick the Monday game, Clemson versus Georgia Tech. I'm going to continue refraining from picking these games. Jack is up first.
It's rapid fire, I know, but I think I do want to at least set a modicum of a stage here that
Rapid fire.
If we do win, many things change, and I don't want that lost on everybody listening, that there is still a crap ton of upside. We had the chance to change college football with our last 2 games last year. We didn't score a point, but we got a shot to change some things here this week still. Give me the Tigers.
Womp womp. Jake.
I hate picking against Tech, even when I know the odds are bad.
You can pick
Never
a cover.
tell me the odds.
You can pick a cover. I just don't know what the spread is.
Yeah, Tech to cover, whatever the spread is.
Okay. Robert, you're last.
If Tech wins, I will fly to Atlanta next Monday night and meet the team at the stadium. I don't have a plane ticket.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Okay.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Let's do it.
Robert, that's pretty sicko. You know what else is pretty sicko? Our sicko picks of the week. These are other games from around the universe that we have chosen as very, very, shall we say, interesting moments during the weekend. Jake, you're up first. What you got for me?
Yeah, so my sicko pick of the week is Illinois at Indiana. And Indiana's favored by 5.5. That was the consensus starting point. It's moved certain ways since Illinois' thwomping of Wyoming. I do have 2 Indiana grads / students in my family, but I'm still going to pick Illinois, and that is because, neither of these programs are historic. Well, Illinois has a couple national championships, but not very good. Not anything you'll see on the national stage, but it matters to some people. So this week it's going to matter to me. I'm taking Illinois.
Jack, you are up next.
Minnesota and New Mexico State has a 36.5 point spread in Minnesota's favor, which seems reasonable enough for week 1 randomness to get New Mexico State within that point total. So just sheer good betting luck. I think there's that. Also, I saw the Saints are plus 125 to make the playoffs. There's 3 wildcard spots now. That's a good bet. That's just a good bet.
3 wildcard spots in the NFL is just wrong. Speaking of other things that are wrong, Robert.
And in MLB too. It's also wrong there. Sorry, I had to get that in.
No, just to be anti-baseball traditionalist, 3 wildcard spots in baseball are good, actually. Robert, speaking of weird things, Duke is favored by 7 versus Temple. Explain, please.
I can't. Duke should not be favored by 7 over anyone except for Hawaii, I think, after this past weekend. Yeah, give me Temple. Rough start to the Elko era. Duke could be like 1-11-ish. It's bad. It's bad.
I pulled up OddsShark just to check if that spread was actually accurate, because I feel like Jake put it in there as a bit. No, it is entirely accurate. The spread consensus is Duke by 7. However, I will note that the predicted score is Temple 20.6 to Duke 16.8. So the market, the market knows something that, or the models know something that the market doesn't. I did not pick a college football game. I picked an MLS game instead between two very, very bad programs, DC United and Colorado Rapids. I think the Rapids are third from bottom in the Western Conference, and DC United, well, they're probably going to be dead last in the league. Give me the Rapids plus 188. They might score that many goals. DC United, very, very bad. That was Rapid Fire. That was Sicko Pick of the Week. That was our football preview podcast. Does anyone have anything else before we log off for the night?
I'm down on this year, but I still love tech. Go to the games, buy tickets, buy a Section 103 t-shirt, support them, give it everything you got. Let's have some fun.
Robert, you want to plug yourself too while you're here?
Yeah. I'm excited. It's going to be a fun football season. I'll be writing on FTRS like normal, advanced stats, reviews, previews. We'll have Binion Index numbers every Tuesday. I'm also going to be writing for Football Outsiders this year. So I'll have a Monday column that reviews the 5 or 6 or so biggest games from the previous weekend. Really excited about that opportunity. Excited to get to kind of broaden my look at college football a little bit. So read me on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, whatever other day. We'll be around.
All right. I think that about does it for us today. Mr. Grant, do you want to take us home?
Yeah. Since Akshay will never plug anything that he does himself openly, I am going to plug Game on Paper for him, gameonpaper.com. It is a great place to find advanced stats as well. So yeah, take that. People know about your projects. Good job. You can find us online from therumbleseat.com. You can email us from therumbleseat@gmail.com. We read every email that comes in. They have great topic suggestions, comments, questions for the mailbag, whatever it is, we'll make sure it gets to the right place, and definitely want to hear from you guys as well as we move into football, volleyball, and other seasons as those come up. We will be trudging along. So, maybe it'll be something that gets left for January or, sometime next summer, but we do want to hear your thoughts there. You can find us on Twitter as well at FTRS blog. Go give us a like, a retweet, a follow. That does help us out, just like subscribing to this here fine podcast. Tell your friends, tell your family, listen on your significant others' phones, whatever it is that you got to do. It always helps us out. Again, you can comment online. I think we have our DMs open. I don't know. You can find us wherever, but we definitely want to hear from you guys. So we keep providing everything that you guys might want. You can find myself at Jake Grant 98 on Twitter and Jack at Jack Nicholas. For Robert, Jack, and Akshay, this has been Scions of the Southland. Thank you. Go Jackets.